On a walk I once took with my mom in Paris, it was 2 p.m. We came across a homeless man masturbating in the middle of the street. People were on their phones, probably calling the police. But my mom stood still and told me, "You know, Milo could have been doing this." My brother? I was shocked. I was like, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Maybe he's mentally ill, autistic, or he was never taught. This could have been your brother if he hadn't had the support he needed." It hit me then how much effort my mom had put into teaching Milo what most people take for granted, and how not everyone has that luxury. Without early guidance, so many adolescents or adults end up in trouble or stuck in social services for behaviors that could have been prevented with education. It's why conversations about prevention and sexual health education are so vital. We can't wait for an incident to happen to start teaching these skills. And while I know it's a privilege to have the resources and time, it's a conversation we must have because it can truly change lives. Progress can feel impossible. From having an autistic brother to raising a deaf son with cochlear implants, or working with families as a neurotherapist, I've seen how overwhelming it can be to feel like nothing is changing. But life has taught me that growth is always within reach. Every brain can learn and adapt no matter the diagnosis, and believing in someone can shape their future. You see, you have a choice: to live a life weighed down by limitations, or to embrace a life filled with possibility. And I'm here to help you make that choice by sharing stories of caregivers and experts that have changed my life, the tools I wish I had known, and the conversations that have questioned my beliefs. I'm Loloa, and this is All Brains Grow. We're going to be talking about sexual health today, and it's important that we set out the objective first, because you're probably going to hear about things that have never even crossed your mind, or maybe they have. But either way, the goal isn't to scare you. It's not to make you want to protect your child even more. Instead, we're here to educate you, keep you aware, and empower you to be brave. It's about making smart choices. And the one thing I hope you never forget is to always keep your child's independence as the ultimate goal, even if there's fear, even if there are risks. Because your child's independence is what will propel them to growth and to a meaningful life. The same way we have the same fear and risks for our neurotypical kids, it will be the same for our special needs or disabled or neurodivergent children. It doesn't mean that we have to restrict their lives. Hi, Asma.
Hi, Lulu.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Can you briefly introduce yourself for people who don't know you?
So my name is Asmahan. I am a mom of 2 monkeys. I have a PhD in behavioral therapy. I'm a behavioral therapist by training. Right now, I'm focusing more on research. I've been doing research for the past 4 years. My focus has been mainly on safeguarding strategies, sexual health education. I kind of transitioned throughout my career, so I've been in this field for 13 years now, I think. I've transitioned from early intervention to where I felt the gap is needed the most, which is with working with adolescents and adults. And that's what got me into safeguarding, safety, sexual health, and that, transitional phase. And so this is what I do now.
Asma is a close friend of mine, a professional whose opinion I take seriously, and who's known for her amazing work with autistic kids and adults in the Middle East. After getting her bachelor in education at AUB, it was fate that brought her to meet the first autistic boy who she would work with, and she hasn't turned her back ever since. Asma's experience and research revealed a significant gap in the Arab world, and that was one in sexual health education. Out of 22 countries, only 6 had prevalence data on sexual abuse. And that data matters because without it, meaningful programs can't be developed correctly. I always say, like, people who get into this and they don't have any personal experience or personal reason for that, it must be, I don't want to say challenging, but what did you like? What did you not like? What did you find hard to get used to?
So what I liked and what I still like and what still pushes me, I think, is the potential for impact. I think that it has. I find it very different than working in a bigger setting. You're working directly with a child. You particularly with behavioral therapy or with even traditional psychology, you get to see the progress that you're making, and you get to see the impact that it has on a single life, on the life of the family dynamics, on the life of the child as a social being. You get to see it across the spectrum. So and you see firsthand the impact that you have through the work that you do. And this is what I liked about it originally. I was working with one child and ended up working with a lot more, but with every one, I got to see the progress happening. And
can you describe like a progress that filled your heart?
Honestly, when I was working in early intervention, now I feel it's very different when we're working with adolescents. But in early intervention, because you took me back to that place and to what really got me more into it, we focus a lot on communication. I think that's one of the first goals and first priorities that we have: communication. Requesting and asking. And just when you hear an approximation of a word, I think that just fills you up with so much gratitude, and it makes all the effort worthwhile because now there's communication, and that opens the door to so many other things. It improves the behavior, it improves the relationships with the families, with the friends at school. So just hearing that first word, even if it's not a complete word, or that first sign or that first picture exchange, I feel like that is something that now working with adolescents I miss a bit.
Oh wow.
Because now I'm seeing the child who has already put a lot of effort on their communication, and they come to me with when you work with early intervention, it's still fresh, right? We're still setting up.
I relate to that. Working with adolescents and adults can be more complicated. Results and processes are less black and white than for young children. Because with age, the need for learning how to navigate the demands of everyday life increases. And so it's typically recommended at this point to set up what they call a functional or life skills program. And for Asma, she ended up finding this challenging because these functional programs weren't integrating well with the Arab culture. She found herself culturally translating and adapting constantly.
I mean, it was an hour consultation once a week. Half of that hour would be spent just me trying to explain what our families are like, what our parents are like, who we are as a culture and as a society. And so just the whole idea of our families sometimes having additional help. Our families living with grandparents or alongside grandparents, or that involvement, or even caretakers, so nannies in the house, was something that I needed to explain. There was a lot of translation around the way that the country was set up, so we did not really have public transportation, and working with them on these. And that's when I decided that if I ever end up doing my doctorate, it would be about safeguarding and sexual health education in the Arab world particularly, because this is where I felt the biggest need. I did not find anyone except her to work with me on that. So there was no one in the region that was specialized in this. So
can you describe what you mean by, because maybe people don't know what these terms are.
Yes.
Safeguarding, what we mean by sexual health. And if you were to, I mean, at least in my head, I kind of, and I could be wrong, there's like two categories. There's, and maybe that's what you mean by safeguarding. There's, what the sexual health, how it's done by other people about my body.
Yeah.
And then there's how I take care of my body.
Yeah.
So I kind of see it in like two dimensions, but it could be totally wrong.
So when we're talking about sexual health education, we're talking about both. My perception of my own body, how I take this body around my environment, and how other people perceive it, and it really includes everything. When I talk about this, I refer to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I say when we're talking about sexual health, we're covering everything from physiological needs to self-esteem and, the person understanding his existence and his role in society. So it's covering everything. The feeling of love and belonging, it all included in sexual health education. When we're talking about safeguard, so sexual health education is a subgroup, a subtopic of safeguarding in general. And safeguarding strategies, the main thing about them is that they're preventative. It's a preventative approach to safety. So we're not really talking about what to do after the fact, or it's just about how can we make sure that the child himself, the family, and we're also, when we're talking about safeguarding, we're taking into consideration the whole environment, the whole biosphere, the child, the family, the school, the community, and making sure that everyone is aware of the best strategies, best practice for preventative interventions to make sure that safety is optimal. Emotional safety, physical safety, and everything in between. And one of the ways to do that is through sexual health education. Safeguarding would also include nutrition, maybe, and
but in your
community
case,
safety, and sexual health is just a subgroup of that.
I guess the main question maybe a lot of parents have is, what is the safeguarding strategies that you would do to make sure / know that your child isn't being abused by a therapist? We give our children off to so many professionals. And you never know.
That's true.
From my personal experience, it was always like, with my autistic brother, you could really get into the thoughts and wonder and get scared. And then we ask, are you okay? Are they doing something wrong? Are you being touched? But there was definitely no strategy. There was no approach.
It's kind of a secondary thought, I think, at some point.
I don't think anyone honestly told us what to do and how to approach that.
We're just focusing on so many other skills. I understand. I was there. We're focusing on so many things. We want to get the child to improve across a whole spectrum of abilities, their academics and their social skills, and they're assisted a lot of the times. I don't know about your brother particularly, but a lot of the kids that I work with are assisted 99% of their time. So we feel like we don't need to because there's someone there.
But we've heard horrible
stories that could have been prevented should we had also included. I'm not saying that communication and social skills and academics are not important. They are, but nothing is safe. Nothing is guaranteed if the child is not safe first, right? What would academics do if the child is unsafe? What good would
100%.
Anything else do? What I'm trying to advocate for now through my work and through my outreach efforts is to really prioritize safety first, alongside others or before others even.
So how would that look like?
It depends on the child. It depends on the abilities that they have. But maybe if I could give one, if I would choose one thing to tell parents or professionals to focus on, is the relationship between the parents and the child. This is very important. One of the risk factors that they found for child sexual abuse is a lack of strong communication between the parents and the children, right? So you just said that you ask your brother, how are you, or how was your day, and we sometimes undervalue the importance of that communication and the importance of the child or the adolescent feeling safe in giving an honest answer, right?
Yeah, but there's so many parents who are going to come and tell you, but my child doesn't understand me.
Yeah, so we're talking about children with specific difficulties. But it is possible, and we have done it before, to teach a child to communicate even with so one of the cases that I worked on, the child was non-vocal, non-verbal. He was around, I think he was in his teens, so I think he was 13 or 14 years old. And that's when I met him. He was already non-vocal. They had given up on working on any kind of, and I know I'm giving an extreme situation.
But these examples are great.
So what we did is that we introduced 2 buttons, one that says yes and one that says no. And we made sure that the no one was very loud, so that even when the child was not in the direct care, direct observation of the parents, there was a very loud no button, so should the child need to press it when there was any kind of discomfort or any kind of inappropriateness or anything that he did not want to eat that right now at the moment, he could press that button. And we taught that. And we taught him how to use these 2 buttons, just at least to be able to say yes or no. That was the top priority. And now we've expanded it more. But should I have stopped with him at that point, I would have been satisfied that this child has a loud way to say no, or stop this, or I'm not happy with this. Because before that point, he did not. And anything could be happening, no one would, be aware. So whatever level of, and all the way up to a child being able to say, this is what I did today and this is what happened. And when we're talking about maybe children who have less severe needs or less severe diagnosis, or typically developing children, how comfortable, how safe do they feel coming and telling a parent about their day if there is something? I mean, we also start looking at that, at these dynamics. Does your child feel safe coming to tell you, hey, Mom, today my friend did this and it was inappropriate? Or do they worry about your reaction? And do they worry about what you're going to say and how harshly you're going to judge that friend? And then everything in between. We've worked on sign language. We've worked on picture exchange. We've worked on so many different ways of communication. And also communication of their wants and their needs and their preferences. I think when we're talking about children with a diagnosis, we teach them to be so compliant early on. Again, I was guilty of that. We're working early intervention. We just wanted compliance. We did not accept no. We had a program called Accepting No Program, right?
That's a big thing for you to say.
Yeah. And it's so there are some families who I started working with early on and I'm still working with now, and I've seen that change and they've seen that change, and I'm like, listen, I'm sorry, we've taught this. It was important at the time. It was the best that everybody knew. But now we need to kind of teach them, say, no, I don't want to do this. I'm not happy with this. At least with my experience, I did not learn to do that. I did not learn the importance of self-advocacy, of teaching self-advocacy, self-fulfillment, of saying, this is what I feel comfortable with, this is what I don't feel comfortable with. And now it's like, no, please, if you're uncomfortable with something, say so.
But how do you teach what is... We're talking about children with challenges here. Because, the typical child, you could say, it's not okay for someone to touch you. Maybe for a child with a challenge, if maybe we don't say that, I'm wondering if their sensory system or even their understanding of what's correct and what's right and what's wrong would be so blurred. For instance, if it's a therapist, just because that was always my personal fear for my brother. In his mind, I trust this person. So how do you teach that, someone you trust can do something that's wrong? And that's about your sexual health and about your body and how to react to it, and then share that with the parent.
So with what you just said, how do you teach that someone you trust did something that's wrong? If we're going to break down that sentence, we're going to break it down into first knowing what's wrong or right, knowing what's okay and what's not okay, what body parts are okay for someone to touch versus what body parts are not. And the second part is someone you trust, doing something that's wrong. So someone you trust, we also need to very clearly specify for all children with any kind of ability or disability, who are the people that you can trust, and who are the people that, not that, I mean, we can obviously trust a lot more than our parents, but who are the people within our little circle of, safety? Who are the people that I can undress in front of? Who are the people that if they tell me to do something, I kind of need to comply because these are my parents and they have my safety and security first? And who are the people who I can say no to, who I should say no to, who I shouldn't be, hugging and kissing and allowing to walk into the toilet while I'm there and not? So there are two components, the right and the behavior of what's right, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what I should be reporting, and the people being able to specify what different categories of people we have in our lives, because I think we all function that way.
Yeah.
But we've learned to do that in such an abstract manner. We've picked it up from different social cues. We've picked it up from just observing and learning. And some children with autism or adolescents with autism do not have that ability to pick up or to learn from their environment the way that other children would. So we've taken for granted how we've learned to differentiate between who I can, be sitting in my socks with, and who I need to be wearing a suit and tie in front of, and who I can, say a bad word in front of, who I need to be very careful. We've learned that through our experiences, but we have not yet taught it maybe to some of the kids who did not learn it. So we need to be very clear about this. I think with autism in general, we kind of have to, we push
Everything
ourselves.
has to be clear.
We push ourselves to know, what do we know and how do we know it?
Yeah. That's how people are with my body, right? Now, when we think of children and adolescents, especially, their body is changing. Mm-hmm. They enter puberty, and it's a whole other ball game.
It is.
It's like, I always imagine families like we did. It's like, oh, you think you got out of like this really nice moment of like nice early childhood, and you think you're out of it.
No.
And then unfortunately something like puberty comes, and it really
Big
derails
change.
a lot of things. But then we get out of it and everyone is good. But I know it's a very challenging time for a lot of parents. Hormones are all over the place.
That's true.
There is this aspect of, we're going to use plain words here. What do we do about masturbation? What do we do about teaching, again, what is right, what is wrong? And also, I remember with my brother, I'm using my brother as an example because it's funny stories. He loved my friends who would come over because they were cute girls. And so there was a lot of teaching that happened also about, his erections. And it was obviously embarrassing for me because he's just a year and a half younger than me. So I'd be like, Milo, and I wouldn't know what to do. And it was, and really all of this stuff to us was taught thanks to my mentor, Lynette. But there wasn't we would just call her and be like, oh my God, this happened.
Help. Yeah.
What do we do?
I know that phone call.
But there wasn't, there wasn't any preparation. I wish we were a bit more prepared. I wish someone told us what we could do if something were to happen. So what are your recommendations about all of this?
Start as early as possible. I always say, from day one, we can start teaching about privacy. We don't need to wait. There are so many things that are private that have nothing to do with private body parts, with erections, or with, there's so many things. Going to the toilet, showering, burping, wiping your nose. There are so many things, depends on the family, that are considered private. So when we're talking about private, also we need to objectively define what that is. It's something that is okay, but needs to be done in a specific setting. It's not, there's nothing wrong with an erection. There's nothing wrong with masturbation. It's just about the location and the time of it, right? But there's so many other things that are the same way. So once we teach that, we call them relational frames. Once we build that frame of privacy and that's strong and sturdy, then and the child hits puberty, we just need to add it, add that to the box of what you already know to be private. If a child is walking around in his underwear, for example, and we say, nope, that's private, you need to go somewhere specific to be in your underwear and then get dressed. it would make it that much easier when he does have
true.
an erection to say, look at your body. Do you see what's happening with this change that you're seeing? With this feeling that you're having, this feeling is private, and this change this of your, physiologically what's happening to your penis, it's private. You need to take it somewhere else. So my advice for this is to start as soon as possible, really from day one. I'm changing the diaper, I'm closing the door, right? So with anything that I can, just to make sure that I'm giving off the right message. I think that would make
You're also
things easier.
talking with zero shame.
Yeah.
You're-
with practice.
Yeah, but I think that's the only way that the child would actually be in acceptance of all of the changes that he or she is also going through, and to not feel like they are wrong.
Yeah.
Because you just said something really important. You said there's nothing wrong with erections or masturbation. It's just about doing it in the right way. And I think just getting also to that awareness is difficult for families, and maybe even professionals. But even teaching that, I think if you do it, that same sentence you said, oh, look at your body, you're being very factual, you're being very matter of fact, you're not judging, you have zero emotion in it, and that's an amazing way for the child to actually hear what you're saying and be like, oh you're right, versus oh my god, Ismail, like, oh my god, like, go, please hide.
That's true.
Like, look at your body, look.
Yeah, that's true, 100%. So the way that we do it, and again, this doesn't come naturally to me. I don't think it comes naturally to anybody, right? Even with the parents. So I would, panic at first if something like that happened to me. I had no idea what to do. No one has ever spoken to me about this. It's super normal. Because we have been and I love that about our culture, which is nothing that I want to give up. And also, to some extent, I want to transmit that to the child. I don't mind the child. So I had a mom recently call me on the phone and also go through that. And she said, but I can't do it. I mean, I'll stutter, I'll blush. It's so hard for me to talk to him about this. Like, let him see you stuttering. Let him see you blushing. Let him see that, and let him see that you are, but just do it. Just talk about it. No matter what way you're going to talk about this with him, just do it.
It's better than nothing.
It's better than nothing. It's safer than nothing. It's less aib than what would happen if you don't talk about it, what messages he might get from elsewhere. And talk about it. Say, I'm blushing. I'm uncomfortable having this conversation with you because this is something that is private. But I know that we are in this space where it's okay for me to be talking. I don't want to give that up. One story I always say is when I was giving my first presentation to the university, after I started my doctorate, I was practicing with my supervisor. And it was the first time that I talked about this topic in public, and it was like a conference that the university was doing. And then she said, okay, when I finished, like, okay, great, you're ready. I just want you to do one thing. I want you to stand in front of the mirror and say penis 10 times, because you still say that uncomfortably when you're saying it, and your voice gets a little bit lower, and I remember answering him like, I don't want to. I want my voice to get a little bit lower, and I want my eyes to look to the side when I say penis, because I want them to see that this is how we are. Our culture still finds this, it's, I don't want to be the person that just shouts it, let's whisper about it, let's go in the corner, sit together and whisper in our lowest voice, but let's just keep talking. Let's write letters and send them back and forth. If this is how we're going to do the sexual health education, let's find whatever way that's suitable. But let's just have that conversation no matter what. So I would take the blushing, I would take the stuttering, I would even take the extreme reaction of what's happening, but I would just follow it up with, okay, let's talk about it. Let's talk about why I reacted this way, why it shocked me. And, keep it moving forward. I don't want that to stop it. Does that
What
make
would
sense?
happen if it stops?
What would stop? The conversation.
The conversation.
I mean, there's two things. either the child might go out and get information from elsewhere, and God knows what is out there, how accurate it is, how appropriate it is, how similar it is to the values that we want. It's an excellent opportunity to transmit our values and our preferences as a family. And you know how diverse the world is becoming, and how globalized it's becoming, and how, dare I say, westernized it's becoming. So it's an excellent opportunity for all of us to transmit our culture and our values. So we'd be missing out on this, and we'd be sending off the child to get access to information from God knows where and how. And then we would have to, again, be reactive instead of proactive. Or with some children that have difficulties accessing information, they would end up behaving in ways, they would end up masturbating in public, for example, or undressing in public, or getting too close to someone, not really knowing physical boundaries. And we would have to also be reactive to that, to stop it and to, work against it. Which is why I say the earlier that we can do this, the better. The more control we have over the narrative, the better it is for everybody. And the more fair it is for the child. Then to set him off, you learn what you need to do. You figure it out, and then I will react if there's something goes wrong. I mean, that's a bit unfair because he's busy trying to learn what to do with his body or her body. She's busy trying to figure everything out. And then I'm like here just saying no, no, no to whatever is wrong. Let's just take control of what's being said and done, I think.
What have you seen of a family situation, a boy, a girl, that got to a place where it was so bad that obviously pushes you to work on what you're working, but also that if they were to take all of these steps, they wouldn't end up there. What's the there? What's the? I think people need to have a picture of that, because
I'll tell you. We're talking autism. We're talking typically developing children.
Let's start with autism.
Okay. If I would give one, the most recent one that comes to mind is a mom that I got on a call with, and she was panicking because the girl was not allowed to go to school anymore, and then she was, on a deadline of you have a week to fix this before she can go back to school, or else she can't go back to school, etc. And what was happening is that she had reached puberty, she started bleeding, and she was not accepting to wear a pad. So what would happen is that the mom would put it on her and send her out, but she would undress no matter where she was, on the street, in the school, in the classroom. She would undress, take off her pad, throw it on the floor, and just not accept that sensory experience of wearing something that you haven't been used to. And upon further investigation, I found that the girl even originally had issues with underwear. So she was sensitive. They have different sensory profiles. Each one have different ways of accepting textures. And so that was not dealt with. Then she reached puberty. She was kind of always forced to wear underwear. There were different types of underwears that she would accept. And also it was a pretty complicated case. But they never dealt with that. Then she got her period, and the additional factor of having a pad was causing her a lot of trouble. So she would just take it off and throw it out there. And it really broke my heart because the girl was really happy in school before that. She was happy in school as long as she did not have her period, but she would have her period for 3-4 days where she'd have to go. But then when she'd come back, she would come back with this label of the girl that does this. You know how children can get. So it really got in the way of her ability to learn, her ability to socialize, her ability to maintain friendships, her mother's feeling of, safety and security about her child. I mean, it was just affecting the family as a whole. And I remember always saying, I just wish I met you 2 months earlier before she reached that. I'm not saying 5 years, just 2 months earlier, where we can because what we ended up doing is that we did take her out of school until we fixed this.
Yeah.
And we just desensitized. So the mother, what she realized later on from that experience is that it was possible to do. We just needed to focus on it and to say, okay, let's talk about her experience with underwear and her experience with pads. And so we put an intervention in place, and she ended up going back to school, but she missed out on that part. And she went through what I would consider a traumatic experience of having all the attention on her for ما ضروري ما كان لازم. يعني we could have avoided that. We could have avoided that negative experience that the parents and the child had should we have just targeted this earlier on. So that's one recent example. Another one that happened with a family that I worked with. He was a boy also under the threat. So I'm always under threat from schools, I think. I work well under
They're
pressure.
not willing to help.
They are, but again, they don't. I don't blame them. I was in a school. They don't have the resources. They don't know what. I mean, also, child services can be called at any moment because these issues are not easy to deal with, and you need a professional, and they don't have the resources. So it's
And how is it impacting the other kids?
they need to keep the other kids in mind, and they need to keep the other parents in mind, and completely understandable. Not blaming the schools. I'm just saying I'm always working under the pressure from them of fix this or else. But what happens is that this child had already been out of school he was being homeschooled for around a year when we met, when I talked to the parents. And we talked because he had gone, the parents found out of 2 different instances where he had tried to undress someone else. It was a relative, a cousin, and then someone at a park, a baby at a park, in the public restroom of the park. And that he was not young, so it does count as literal abuse. He was also in his mid to late teens. And the parents came to me of, we know that he's doing this. We found out, we shouted, we yelled, we punished, we did what we could. He's not even going to school. He's not allowed to go anywhere else now. He's not even allowed to go to family gatherings and so on because of what he's doing. And we don't know what to do. And I said, okay, we need to put a plan in place. We need to work with him. And they were a bit hesitant. It was a very conservative family. Mom and dad were working full time. I think of them very fondly. I really ended up building a strong relationship with them. But early on, it was difficult to get through from my end because they were both very busy. They were both very conservative. So the whole topic of sexual health was, it's not something that they were willing to target. So long story short, I do that introductory call and then I don't hear from them again. And then I get a phone call from the father a few months down the line, several phone calls where I couldn't pick up. And then he sends me a voice note saying, if you don't pick up now, I'm taking my son to the police station.
Oh my God.
Because that's the only other option he had, which is technically what anyone should do. You should report this because the child is not able to get the help he needs to stop perpetrating, right, on other kids. But what broke my heart is that it also came from a place of ignorance on the child's part. He did not know. So what happened after I had gotten the chance to meet with him, so long story short, what was happening is that he had been told earlier on that the male and female body are identical. He had asked that question. He has a sister. We don't know where he got that question from, but he had that question. He was told, no, they're both the same. There's no difference. And that ended up creating a big gap in his in his mind, in his consciousness of what? I know that that's not true, but he's not able to put that, he's not able to tell whoever told him that's not true, you're lying. Maybe that's not something that is within his repertoire of words or, so he was out on a mission to find out for himself. What really, and this is what he was doing. He was
How did you guys figure this out?
So through my work with him, I realized, so when we started talking about body parts, we started by drawing different drawings and he would draw them as exactly identical, right? And then from there, I started investigating more with the parents and more with the previous teachers that he had. And then it turns out that this is what he was told and no one ever answered that question for him. And then the parents did not want to, and again, I understood them completely. I understood where they were coming from. I understood the lack of resources, the lack of supports that they had in order to do this. And what I found is that even when I suggested specific resources of this is how we can explain it, this is a very nicely published book that I use with my own kids to explain different body parts, they're like, no, that doesn't go with, I don't want my child to see this. Some families don't have problem with real pictures. Some families prefer illustrations. Some families prefer illustrations without faces. So there are different levels of preferences, and we really have to be humble with our awareness of other families' preferences. I cannot assume, and this is one of the ways I learned this. I cannot assume that what works with me. I use this book with my kid. What do you mean you don't want to use it with your kid? I cannot assume that, because that would end up with them saying, okay, then your services are not for me. I'll go somewhere else. Yeah. Right. And this is what happened. So I kept suggesting, and we ended up making our own resource that suits the family, that they accepted. It took a couple of back and forth meetings to get the right social story in place that explains the difference between the female body and the male body. And we ended up teaching him that. And we ended up working on his communication and on his ability to ask questions and, the ability of the father to answer them properly. So there are other things, but this memory sticks with me, and I often refer to it because it's one of those situations that says that he probably could have stayed in school. He probably shouldn't have left school. And he missed out on this big part because of a lack of information, nothing else.
It's important to note that things aren't so black and white, and this really is a complex issue. Solo sexual behavior can sometimes be a way for autistic adolescents, adults, to release anxiety or stress. It's often like a form of stimming. But it's also tied to hormones, and while that's normal, there are limits. If it's happening too often or leads to harm, it's a sign that medical help might be needed. The real issue, though, is what happens when these kids age out of school or centers. There's this big gap, what we call the cliff, where services and activities suddenly stop, and at the same time, they're going through adolescence, discovering ways to feel good that don't require much effort, and they have nowhere else to go or nothing else to do. What's needed is a focus on creating structured spaces, whether that's vocational programs, social groups, or even activities to build leisure skills. Things that help them stay engaged and functional. Without that, they're left sitting idle, and it's hard to ask someone to delay or redirect their behavior when they don't have anything else to turn to. It's about building a full life, one that gives them purpose, connection, and opportunities to grow beyond the support systems they had as kids.
I just want to add that if there's one advice that I can give, is that it's never too late and it's never too early. Mm-hmm. So whether it's an adult, that he's already an adult, she's already an adult, or whether it's a 1-year-old child, I think there's always space for that conversation. And there's always room to learn, there's room to grow, even if the resources that are out there are not suitable for a specific family or for the specific culture. They can be modified, keeping an open mind. They can be modified. So with a lot of the families that I work with, I end up creating my own resources for that particular family. I'm not a graphic designer. I can barely use Microsoft Word, but I do have access to Google Images and I do have access to PowerPoint, and I can put together a social story that is appropriate. So there's always a way to create resources, even if the ones that are out there are not suitable. That should not put families off from this whole topic of sexual health education.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, this is a beautiful thing to end on. Thank you.
Thank you, Lulu. Thank you for this opportunity.
I hope you enjoyed it.
I appreciate it.
This was All Brains Grow. Thanks for joining us. You can head to allbrainsgrow.com/podcast for more resources and support. This show was produced and edited by Lina Fansa and myself, Lulua. Music by Blue Dot Sessions.